morning, everyone, and welcome into Awe Studio. Today, we're going to go over all the different materials that you need for veil painting. And for YouTube channel, I'm just going to name the materials and briefly talk about them. And then for my patrons at Awe Studio Patreon, you can go there and you will get a more detailed description of how you should use all the materials and prepare them. So the first thing you're going to need is some masonite boards. These are tempered masonite wall boards that you can buy at the home store. And the tempered part means that they have a waterproofing on top. Excuse all the scribbling, this has been used quite a lot. And as you can see, this board is about 1/4 of an inch thick. That's the recommended thickness so that your boards don't warp when you stretch the paper, but you can also get thinner drawing board type boards, which are only 1/8 of an inch thick. And that would be your standard for drawing if you got them at the art store, such as this one right here. And you can see it's quite stiff. It'll be a lot more expensive if you get it at the art store than if you get it at the home store, and they'll need to cut it for you. Now you're going to need some paper, obviously, in order to veil paint. And for veil painting, it's very important that you get a paper with a tooth. And I don't know if you can see that, but it has little ridges in it, which means that it's cold pressed. Smooth paper will not grab the watercolor in the same way. And here you see a heavier sheet, which is like a 140-pound sheet from Fabriano. You can get very expensive paper, and I suggest for beginners just to get a student quality 90-pound weight and wait for later to buy the really expensive paper. And then you're going to have to stretch the paper onto those boards. Now there's different types of tape that you can use for watercolor stretching. One of the common ones that people use for watercolor stretching is a self-adhesive tape, like this right here, which is called artist tape. This can't be used for veil painting, however, because the paper will be wet when you stretch it, and so the self-adhesive will just come off. You also shouldn't use regular painter's tape that you would use for painting walls. This will be too sticky and grab your paper and maybe rip it when it comes off. So what you have to get is a paper tape that has glue on one side that's activated, the other side is matte. And I show this in my video on Patreon, how to stretch the paper. That's a whole nother segment. But just know that you have to get the paper tape that has the glue activating on one side with water. Here's a paper that has been stretched with veil painting tape, and you can hear it's very tight, like a little drum. And what happens when you stretch the paper across here with the tape is, since the paper is wet, as it dries, it gets pulled tight onto the masonite board, creating this surface which is similar to a canvas but with cotton paper. And the reason we have to have this with veil painting is because as we're putting the wet layers on the dry paper, it's going to get bubbly or ripply, and then each time, because of the tape, it'll dry taut. Let's talk about the paints that we use in veil painting. We're not going to use a liquid paint, but rather we're going to use tube paints for this type of technique. And we do that because we're going to squirt out little bits of color on these saucers, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then we add just pure water to the saucer and mix the value of color that we want. In veil painting, the value increases over time. So you don't start out with the color that you end up with. You create that color by mixing and applying layers upon layers to the veil painting. So you can start off with not investing that much money into the paints by getting student grade. I got these saucers at my local thrift store, and you could pick them up very inexpensively. These are just old diner saucers. And I recommend you get white so that you can see the color that you're mixing up inside. And also these saucers generally have a lip to put the paint on, and then you can have a well for the water. I'm going to show you in the Patreon video exactly how to do this and how to apply it. So don't forget about going there. Here are some examples of brushes that I use for veil painting. You might notice that they have a stiffer bristle. This is like an acrylic brush, and watercolor brushes are much softer. You don't want to actually use a watercolor brush for this technique. You want something stiffer like these boar bristle brushes. I know that a lot of people are wanting to have non-natural type brushes in order to respect our animal friends, and I understand that completely. But I will say that the natural bristle absorbs the water into the ferrule and bristles so that when you apply it, it's a more even stroke. I will say that a natural bristle brush is better for absorbing the color up into itself, and that helps you to apply a more even color, which is important to veil paint. Right now on my Patreon, I have a video up on how to stretch veil painting paper. And here on YouTube, you can find one how to re-stretch veil painting paper, which is also quite helpful. Also on Patreon, I have a bunch of different videos on veil painting, starting from a very basic exercise like the archetypal blue and going through quite difficult ones involving different colors that you wouldn't normally see in a painting. So please join us there and follow along the next few months as I repost and post new videos on veil painting. Thank you so much. I appreciate your support.